All right, well, we have our 4 panelists here. That's good. And we have a couple more just joining us. Welcome, good morning. We're glad that you're here, and I wanna let you know who our panelists are today. Wende Ballew, thank you. Kimberly Parker, Khaliah Johnson, and Sciarrone. Thank you all for preparing and for gathering and starting a conversation so that this group can join you in that. I'm really grateful. I'd like to get us started by having our 4 panelists just tell you a couple of words about themselves in this season, who they are, where they're sheltering and who they're sheltering with, and then just a quick word about how each of them engaged in the mission and ministry of Central Pres prior to the pandemic. So prior to the pandemic, how are you involved in ministries of service or social witness at Central? Who'd like to start?
I can start.
Thanks, Kimberly.
So let's see. I'm sheltering in Atlanta, in our house in East Lake with Ellen and Timmy, our little 4-legged boy. So that's who I've been with and where I am. Prior to all of this, I mean, my service and all was through the OAC. I think y'all know that piece of it. And that has continued to some degree. Again, I'm sure you're somewhat aware, probably aware, that we've, for the last 5 to 6 weeks, 6 weeks, I think, we opened back up, but only 1 day a week, and that was for people to check their mail, pick up their mail. And I'll probably talk a little bit more about that as we go further into the conversation. So I think I answered the questions.
I can go. I'm Wende Ballew. We're sheltering in our home in East Point with Aaron and my mother. And, you know, before this, I was on, or I'm on the, I always get the acronyms wrong, Worship and Music Committee. And that was kind of a new thing for me. And before that, for many years, I was on local missions, and I'm on the anti-racism task force.
Thank you, Wende.
And, you know, just generally just being a contrarian.
I'll go next. I'm Khaliah. Everyone knows me, I think. Khaliah Johnson. I have been sheltering in place in my home in the West End, but mostly out of the home because of my professional life as a pediatrician, both in the hospital setting and also in the clinic setting. I run the palliative care team at Children's Atlanta, so covering both Eggleston and Scottish Rite hospitals, but then I also spend part of my clinical time in the pediatric HIV clinic. So there's been lots of busyness with our patients and their families and community needs, which has called me to be at work very regularly. And Aubrey has been, my 4-year-old has been at the Y and in the neighborhood, the East Lake Y, so we're grateful for the community resources there. And my life at Central in terms of service has been mainly rooted in my role on the board of the Child Development Center, where Aubrey normally is in child care. And then I have been recently called to serve as an elder, which I'm super excited about, and it's interesting times to be going through that process, and has called me to be very reflective about what community means in that context. So that's me.
Thank you, Khaliah.
I'm Chris. Ann and I have been here at our house in Oakhurst in Decatur. Like I mentioned a minute ago, spending inordinate amounts of time on our front porch because the weather's been so great. So we're both working from home. Both of our kids are in college and they have off-campus apartments, and so they're still away. They were not living in dorms and forced to leave. So they've been home to visit a few times, but they sort of prefer to stay where they are and do their own thing. Prior to this all happening, I've been part of the local mission committee for many years. Also serve on the anti-racism task force with Wende and a group of others. And I'm currently on the session, but my term is expiring. So I'm actually rotating off of the session this month or next, or whenever that transition happens. So, you know, in both the sense of local mission and anti-racism, you know, we've been having ongoing conversations about sort of, you know, where do we go next? How do we continue to do those things that are necessarily pretty hands-on, that, you know, those can't be done remotely like this call or like we do worship remotely. So just trying to figure that out and engage as many people as possible.
Thanks, Chris. That's a perfect segue for you all to talk a little bit more about, you know, how have you been involved in the ministries of service and social witness in the pandemic? And to what degree has the pandemic frustrated those efforts and or your ability to be engaged in service and social witness in the ways that you would like to? So a little bit about pandemic times and your involvement in service and social witness. I'd like to go first.
Well, I guess I'll say that it's certainly been a little bit frustrating. I mean, like I mentioned, these sorts of activities are necessarily person-to-person, hands-on. So when you think about which types of activities we've been good at translating into a remote work or online work, you know, for example, our Sunday morning, you know, courtyard coffee is the perfect example. You know, that I think we did that for maybe 2 weeks before the virus, you know, in between the virus actually becoming known and the decision to close the building. So I think for 2 weeks there, we did it and people wore gloves, and I don't think we had masks on, or so we tried to do it for those couple of weeks. And just imagine, you know, there's lots of common things that are being touched and handed back and forth. There's people who are very close together. There's handshaking and hugging and all those things that are just completely off limits now. So, I mean, I would say that we've become aware of more need and also of dwindling resources. And it's taken a while to really get some traction and figure out how we do these things and do it safely and minimize risk.
Thank you, Chris. Who else?
I'll go because I can somewhat tag on to Chris in talking about I was not involved in courtyard ministry, and the main reason is because if I did that on Sundays, I would have felt like I was at work 6 days a week instead of 5. So, but thinking about people experiencing homelessness, I mean, it's been a challenge for us. In the beginning, my first thing was to suspend our volunteers from working with us. That was kind of the first steps to say, you can't, I don't think it's wise. So then I kind of thought staff could do it. The 4 of us could make it happen. And we did that for a couple of days. And then things shifted again very quickly. So we completely shut down for at least a couple of weeks. But the concern was, and the need, not just our normal services of IDs and birth certificates. What we're most well known for is mail, and that we do serve as an address for people who don't have an address. And so we keep documents that'll help move a person forward. So an ID or a birth certificate, a food stamp card, a check, debit card, those types of things. And our guest, we knew, needed access to that and to be able to pick those up. So I spent some time on the phone one afternoon with David Hunter, and kind of talked through how can we do this and be as safe as possible for our guests and for my staff. And I'm grateful for that conversation, because honestly, had he not just talked through things with me, I don't think I would have known how to do that as safe as possible. So, you know, we've been doing that, and I go out every Wednesday morning and talk to the guests and say, we're going to get back open for other things. But some of that was uncontrolled by us in that down. So what we do most of, IDs and birth certificates, even had we been open, we could not have done those services or provided it. So I think we've done well in being open for mail check and putting those things in our guest hands. And on Wednesday mornings, it's just been incredible to watch them pick up a stimulus check. Or this past week, it was a care package from a guy's mama, and he was so excited. And so I'm thankful that we've been able to do that in this in-between time.
Thank you, Kimberly. And I don't know whether it was your connection, mine, or somewhere in between, but there was just a small bit that I missed, and some others might have missed. And you were telling us that some of your services, you know, that are really important, you're also unable to offer them in part because I think what you were saying is that government offices are shut and were shut. And so therefore, even if you wanted to open to offer ID support and paperwork support, that wouldn't have been able to have been submitted in this interim time. Is that accurate? Yeah,
that's accurate. Georgia Department of Driver Services vital records, and they're still closed for general purposes. They are now, the BDS is open for appointments only. You do have to make those online. So we're trying to look at that system and see what we can do to open back up for fuller services and get our people in there for that.
Awesome. Thanks, Kimberly. All right, Wende or Khaliah?
I'll go. In terms of social witness and involvement in the church, it's been very interesting phenomenon for me of being on the CDC board at this time, because I have the dual role of being a CDC parent, and my work life has been so all-consuming that it really feels very much like we're in, for the last few weeks, Aubrey and I have been in triage survival mode. But that's given me, I think, a very interesting perspective on just the needs of parents and families at this time, children's needs, and being thoughtful about the role of the CDC within that. I think the board is working very hard to support staff and make sure that staff could stay salaried as long as possible until it's safe to open again. But there's going to be a limit to that. And how do you support people through that uncertainty? I have been very proud to see our board's leadership in Linda just really advocating and at the same time expressing we're all living through uncertainty, so let's band together, support one another through that, and ultimately it will be okay. I think the CDC has benefited from some of the government funding that's come through, which allows us to keep up the payroll for staff. And thus far, it seems like families who normally have their kids at the center are managing. Everyone's balancing this work from home phenomenon with the kids at home, and the CDC teachers have been able to put together resources to engage the kids and provide some level of support for at least a few hours of the day to parents. So for those parents who are at home, I think that's been a great benefit. It has also just led me to reflect my personal experience on the importance of connecting to people and reaching out to people. I know my lifeline through this has been the church community. Like the first several weeks of people just gathering around Aubrey and I when I reached out to Jessica about 2 to 3 weeks into the pandemic, when things were so busy at work. I was beside myself. My best friend lost her father to COVID in New York, and none of us could travel. It was a breaking point for me, and to be able, as a single parent who didn't have the CDC anymore, reach out to Jessica and say, I need help, I need my community, and to have people instantly respond and still responding to us and present for us has been so impactful. So as I'm talking, I'm realizing our next step as the CDC board can be to just find little ways to reach out to parents, because we're likely going to be closed until August. Everyone's doing their best. How can we keep helping you and supporting you through that? I also neglected to mention I'm newly involved in the last few months in the Global Missions Committee with church, and that has been phenomenal to really start engaging with that committee. And I think folks within the committee are thinking very beautifully about the needs of folks in other places across the world who we don't hear about in this pandemic, but who will be impacted not just in regards to their health, but their financial standing. And what can we do to keep supporting them? So there's lots of thoughts about how we can keep the selling of coffee up, and encouraging people to do that virtually, but also thinking about our global local community and the refugee community in Clarkston, and how do we just extend ourselves as a church through the individuals, the organizations we already partner with. So lots of good things coming out of Ready, Set, Love through the Global Missions Committee. So I'm very excited to be a part of that.
Thank you, Khaliah.
Well, I'd say it's been a lot different. Our committee work has continued in different ways. And I think, well, I know Aaron and I's initial reaction was to be like, oh, we have a professional Zoom account. We can just host social things. So we host 3 different social things a week, and that everybody's invited to, and through Zoom. And then when I saw on my calendar that Rebecca Circle was supposed to come up, I was like, oh, how can we make that happen? And we've had 2 Rebecca Circle meetings, and the last one, some folks were able to join, or the last 2 times people were able to join that had moved away. And so they were able to be with their friends in this time, friends they hadn't seen in a very long time. So that was very nice. You know, and I think it's, we just really just try to stay connected with people and check in. And it's strange for me because it seems like such passive actions where I'm, used to being such a hands-on kind of thing. And that's been a challenge for me.
Thank you, Wendy. So you guys have talked already a little bit about, what you've learned because of the disruption that we've experienced. But I wonder if you might just do a little bit more reflecting. What have you learned about Central in the midst of this pandemic? And it doesn't have to be like an enduring thing that is true about Central in all of time, but have you been walking along? What have you learned about Central in the midst of the pandemic because of the disruption that has caused things to pause and you to reflect? What have you noticed? What are you learning?
Well, I mean, I can start, and I'll forgive me for starting on a negative foot, but I think one thing that's been apparent to me is it's a little bit like it's like a low tide. It's like there's things that were submerged that are revealed now, and one of those things is our sense of privilege, right? I mean, we engage in this work. We're very sincere. We're very dedicated. to doing social justice and outreach and all this stuff. Yet suddenly it becomes obvious that it's a choice. We're not compelled by as much maybe as I would like us to be. You know, the sense of solidarity with, you know, these brothers and sisters who have these needs, who we help. We have the privilege of closing the door and walking away, and that's a little bit disheartening to me. Now, on the other hand, I've also seen incredible sort of creativity. I've seen people, you know, imagination really being applied in new ways of how to do this. I mean, when I'm down, you know, walking around the church, I see that there's a community around us, and there's people who I don't know who are driving up and distributing food and water and giving out face masks and hand sanitizer and all sorts of things. And so other things are arising, and people are being really creative to meet these needs. So I guess I'm trying to look at it sort of half full and half empty.
Thank you, Chris.
I got a little emotional at the question, and I really appreciate the humility you call us to hold, Chris, in your sentiment, and reminding us of our privilege. Like we're all so profoundly fortunate to have what we have, not just when you think about the practicalities of our social circumstance, finances, you know, all of the practical tangibles when we think about disparities in our society, right? But we're so privileged because of the love we have amongst one another. And that's what I go to when I think about what I've learned about Central in this time. It's just been a few short weeks, but the examples of the love have been so deep for me and so profound. Everything that I believe the church to be, that I believe Christ wanted the church to be, I have seen that in Central in this time, which might be one of the most remarkable times of stress and apparent disparity for some folks in the church, particularly the younger generations of folks who have never lived through anything like this. So to see people standing up and loving and being a witness in the midst of that has just moved me so greatly. So again, these things that might feel like to you little things, but the meals that have been brought to Aubrey and I, the phone calls, the encouragement that helped me to get up and stand on the front line and get out and serve the way God has called me to serve, the opportunities that are created for us to give back. So yesterday, I went and did some of the deliveries of meals to the homeless through, I'm forgetting the organization's name, Jessica, if you could remind me, where we could sign up to deliver meals. And one of my best friends and I, we put on our masks, we put Aubrey in the back seat, we picked up meals and delivered meals to East Atlanta. In our privilege, in my Volvo SUV, but Aubrey could see the need. And at one point I was so moved. There was a man just on a corner in East Atlanta, back behind a gas station, in his wheelchair, smoking a crack pipe, who needed a meal. I have not seen someone smoking crack out in the open in public since I was a child growing up in Brooklyn in the 90s, in the middle of the crack epidemic. And that's in my backyard in East Atlanta. And we didn't talk about it. We bore witness. We brought love to that man in serving a meal. And my little boy, who lives a very different life, saw nothing but this human being who had a need. And God putting us there to help meet that need. So that, to me, that's nothing but love, and that's nothing but what the church should stand for. And I'm so grateful. And Central has created those opportunities. So that's what I have learned about Central in this time.
Amen. Khaliah, thank you so much for sharing that experience and for helping us sort of all ride around in that car with you together. We're going to find a way to elevate that as well for the broader congregation, because I think so many people, if someone else goes first and they can ride around in the back of their car, even virtually, they, you know, have a little more courage to do the same thing. So thank you, Khaliah. And the organization that is coordinating some of that is Partners for Home, and we can help connect everybody else to see that on the website too. Thanks. Yeah.
I was feeling, you know, of course there's the doer, a certain kind of way, and, you know, and as Chris, and we actually had some conversations about it, and I was pretty harsh in my assessment of some things. But I've had a change of, a little bit of change of attitude, especially, and I think what really helped with that was when I reached out to church leadership and said, hey, I'm really concerned about this. And I received a yes, and we're working on this. We realize this. And it allowed me, and actually Erin was writing a little paper around an essay around this, and her essay helped me think about, you know, I grew up in a church that was so inwardly focused, and in a lot of ways in the past, people have said about Central that we don't look at the care of the congregation as much as we look at the outward focus. So my analysis now is that, you know, during the first month or more of this pandemic, I feel like Central did such an amazing job of focusing in and making sure that, you know, building systems and building things that could make sure that the congregation was safe and healthy, and checking in, you know, with mental health and things like that, and providing more and more opportunities for people to be engaged with each other and to, you know, strengthen that community. And then once that was kind of rolling, taking it back to that outward look. And I hope that that continues now and beyond this, because I think it is a winning combination, and it inspires people in so much, in a way to be able to help others when we're healthy in ourselves.
That's really well said, Wendy. Thank you. Thank you. And so many of you have illustrated that with what you've said about your own experiences. And it's really beautiful to see all of that lived out. I mean, if you think about Christ, you know, when the person comes to Jesus and says, like, what's the greatest commandment? You know, what's the most important thing? And you know, in the Hebrew tradition, there are just hundreds and hundreds of commandments. So how do you order it? And Jesus says, well, there are two, you know, love God and love neighbor as yourself. And really, there are sort of three beings, right, if you will, all wrapped up into that. It's neighbor and self. But those things are just sort of like this mutual dance of wellness, and you know, they can't be separated either. So I think that's such an interesting thing that we've learned by doing, that when one can be healthy, the other can be healthy, and we just keep moving along like that. That's great. Anything else that you want to share about learnings during the season of disruption?
Yeah, I wanted to just talk a little bit about Wednesday mornings. And the first week that we reopened for people to come and pick up their mail, I felt pretty strongly that I knew that there were meals being served. Partners for Home has done an incredible job of making that happen. I've been on weekly calls to hear about that. But I knew that hygiene items and just snacks, just something to have along the way, were important. And those were things that at the OAC, if we had them on hand when we were open on a regular basis, we handed those out. It wasn't something that we didn't do a lot of promoting around that. People donated when they could or wanted to. And for some reason, I felt like as a person comes to check their mail, and whether or not they take a piece of mail away from them or not, they need to walk away with hygiene items that are really critical right now. And they need some snacks to carry along the way, to eat in between meals. So really put that plea out to Central. In the first week, I didn't go up to the road for very long to receive donations. Our security guard was doing that. And then the next week, our security guards were late, and we had said 8:30 to 9:30 is when you can drop things off. Well, I want to honor that time and not have people just come and sit outside the church and nobody's there to receive them. So I went up. And I've now been on the street each Wednesday. And just being able to face to face with somebody, dropping things off, have a conversation with them, to have a conversation with our guests who are standing there in line waiting on us to open, all of us talking at a safe distance with masks on. It's been powerful. And I think I've connected with church members that I would not have connected with before, because different people have brought things each week. And so, Central has responded in a way that isn't just busy work. It's necessary things. And I'm just grateful for that.
Kimberly, could you say just quickly what else you still need? What are the needs that, while we're all here listening?
So, again, I think snacks and hygiene are critical. I had panicked this past week because prior to this week, we had masks to give everybody who did not have one. Some of our guests walk up and already have a mask they've received elsewhere, but not everybody. And I'm trying to talk with them about why it's important to wear a mask before we open the doors for them to check mail, just so they understand we're not afraid of you. We're trying to protect you as well. So we ran out of masks this past week, and I was kind of panicked, but we made all of it work. And I put a couple of pleas out after that, and we've got additional masks coming in this week. But I just think this isn't over, and I think masks are going to be a part of life for a little while. So that's just, I want to have those on hand. And we had guests who walked up on Wednesday and said, "Do you have a mask?" And I said, "Yep, as soon as we open, we will have one to hand to you." And we ended up, like I said, running out. But just those items are the things that I think are critical for us right now, just to keep those and know that we've got a bag with hygiene goods and snack goods ready to hand to every person who comes.
Thank you, Kimberly. We'll be sure to note that in our social media and Wednesday e-news and make sure that folks know that's a particular need right now. Thank you. And thank you for being so vulnerable with the story and the time out on the corner, receiving gifts from the church that touched you so deeply. It's really moving, and really, I'm very grateful for you sharing it. Thank you. So now these last two questions are ones that I want to ask to everyone, including the panelists. They've had some time to think about it ahead of time, so they may jump in as first responders, or you may have something that inspires you and just jump right in, and we'll have a little bit of a dialogue. So the next two questions are these, and I'll put them in the chat box. How might the Spirit be reshaping us in this season? So what might God be calling us to become or to do together because of our experiences now? And the second, what do you think a few next steps are as we live in an extended season of pandemic and continue to live in God's call? So they're kind of both sides of the same question, if you will. It's all about who are we becoming? What is God calling us to do? And however you choose to answer that will be really welcome. So I'm going to put those in the chat box and invite you all to jump in as you feel led. And I'll just do a little bit of timekeeping in this conversation, okay? Who'd like to start?
I mean, I'm happy to start. I think
Great.
I think one thing is just for Central to continue just being open to different ways of doing things. I mean, I've just been amazed to watch people transition to even online worship. That's not easy, you know, and the church has responded to that. And I think, I don't know, for me, I keep telling myself, be open to change, which I hate, but just be open to it, and let's see what we can do with it. And it's pretty amazing when I will keep my eyes and ears peeled for something different and not the way it's always been.
I guess sorry, go ahead, Wendy.
I was just thinking about how my, just life and work and everything has shifted so drastically. I've not been in a prison since the middle of March, and don't foresee that happening anytime soon. And unlike a lot of the other higher education and prison programs, we can't really depend on, use correspondence as our main method of delivery, because our pedagogy depends on theater. And so, but what I've been able to do and what's kept me going is just collaboration, working with all of these other organizations. And then, and I see that within the church too. And even, during our, one of the things is we're doing more direct service for our alumni who are in very vulnerable positions right now. Many of them are unbanked and still have not received their stimulus checks, for various reasons. People steal people's identity while they're in prison. It takes a long time to fix that with the IRS. And so they actually could not get their stimulus check or their tax returns or anything during this time. But during one of our social calls, I made Adam and I were talking, and, so Mast House has partnered with us to help provide food and things like that. So it's just reaching out, and instead of just trying to do everything ourselves, just figuring out really where are the connections, and having the first, for the first time in a long time, having the time to actually find those connections and nurture them and things like that has been a huge shift for me and has been very valuable.
Wendy, I thank you for that contribution in particular, because I think churches are going to need to do a lot more of that partnership cultivation too. And so it's a real benefit to us to hear how you've been doing that in your professional life and how it's been fruitful for you. And I think as a church, we can continue to think about how some of these partnerships could allow us to be more fruitful in our service. Much as Khaliah described earlier with her ability to just plug on into Partners for Home and get on the road. I think we're all made better when we can collaborate, and this window gives us time to do that. Yeah. Others?
Yeah, Wendy, I'm glad you said that about connections. That's in fact, what I was sort of about to say is that this phrase of connecting the dots seems to be recurring a lot. And I think we're building much more robust connections. I think that we've learned pretty quickly sort of where the needs are and where the resources are, and just making those connections between them and in a really robust way, and probably I think in a stronger way than we have prior to now. And I think that's one of the good things that may come out of this, is I think that it enables us to sort of cut through the nonsense, right? I mean, we're able to get right to the heart of what do people need, where do we get those resources and how do we get it to them? Like those are like the really simple questions that everything kind of boils down to right now. And it allows a lot of the other sort of, noise and clutter around these questions to go away. I mean, it enables to me like sort of a sense of clarity, that wasn't always there before when we were in sort of more, normal environment.
I think in terms of thinking about what's next, and what I'm hopeful to see from here, I really keep going back to the sermon that you gave a few weeks ago, Jessica, the Ready, Set, Love sermon, where you spoke to this phenomenon that Kimberly also just spoke to, that we're not going to be out of this anytime soon. And I think in some ways now in this moment, the dust is settling of the very acute portion of this pandemic. We're seeing that on the healthcare side of like, okay, we're starting to stabilize in some ways, but there's going to be all of this downstream repercussion. As a pediatrician, I'm seeing it manifest, and like the kids are out of school. There's no immediate solution to this. The stress level's high at home. Kids are now slowly starting to report more incidents of abuse at home. Where is food coming from? Kids are not getting school lunches. They're not getting school breakfasts. They're going to be profound needs in terms of food insecurity. How do we be proactive and think very much what are around the lines of what are going to be the needs over the next 6 months to a year plus, and whatever we can do as a church community to think proactively. In some ways, to me, it ties into the spiritual gift of prophecy. Like, what can we anticipate and foresee that's coming down the line that we can prepare for and be of service around?
Thank you, Khaliah. I love that. I've never heard anybody make that connection about the gift of prophecy and helping anticipate the needs of others in a time like this. I really like that. Thank you. Others? How might the Spirit be reshaping us in this season? Or what do you think some of our next steps are together?
Well, I'll jump in. One of the things that I've been pondering throughout all this time has been, how do we get more involved in the whole public advocacy thing, looking at policies that our government is establishing. I'm not very good at that, but I do have a strong sense that I need to become better at it. And I think the congregation has a lot of potential that we have never really tapped into. And so I just think that the policies that our government establishes, and I think particularly in a time like right now with the particular president and governor and kind of legislative leaders that we have, we need to be an alternative voice in the midst of all of that. And so that's most of the things we've talked about thus far have been talking about direct action. But I really hope that we can become involved more in some kind of public policy conversation.
Thank you, Lee. The Presbyterians for a Better Georgia has recently issued a couple of calls to advocacy type action related to the budget and what will be coming very soon, that then has downstream effect on food availability, education access, health access, all of these things. So those are great partner avenues for expressing those kinds of endeavors. So thank you, Lee. And I think someone, I don't remember who it was, whether it was on this call or someone else, said, it might have been you, Lee, said there used to be a committee within the church that was particularly looking at public policy. Was that you, Wendy? Thanks. Maybe remind us of what that was and how it could be potentially helpful in this time too.
Well, we had issues in advocacy that, really looked at, was instrumental on writing motions for the General Assembly and things like that, but also really pushing towards responding to governmental things. And we had, and even I remember a couple of times taking groups over to the governor's office to talk directly to the office about issues. And it was, always very well received, because, we are, like Lee says, we are seen as people with influence. And just from that position, even if we don't have a current member in the House of Representatives or anything like that right now, but I do think that there is a lot of momentum, and I'll just say, and a lot of these, and I think it has to be done. I've been trying to reach out and try to get some traction around reporting or something around these budget cuts in the prisons. And, of course, I'm not a pro-prison kind of thing, but an additional $78 million cut from the Department of Corrections right now is murder.
Amen.
Thank you, Wendy.
Jessica,
Mm-hmm.
this is Mary. And listening to all of this, and particularly listening to Wendy talk about criminal justice issues in our state and in the South particularly. And we had just finished reading Just Mercy in the Keystone class. Hannah Trawick had done a great job of helping lead discussions. And we were talking about these enormous criminal justice issues. Some people had been to Montgomery to see the legendary memorial. And Lee was gonna come and talk about prophetic imagination and how we can be prophet, and from a book by a rabbi talking about prophets then in the Old Testament and now in our time, and how we can be a prophetic church. And then it all ended. And Lee didn't even have to do Sunday school.
Thank God. Look at him.
And I had been trying to get Raj Nadella, our New Testament professor, to talk about his work in empire. And I thought it's all over. And Raj had turned me down twice. I thought Sunday school is over. The Keystone class is dead. And then I get a message from Raj basically apologizing for bailing out twice, but asking if he could teach Sunday school this summer. And I thought, oh, the Keystone class is not dead yet. It's alive. Raj is going to do a summer Sunday series on his work of empire and economic issues and liberty. So all of you tune in. Raj is going to teach. But to get to this issue of criminal justice, Wendy, people were coming and talking and thinking about how central can be a prophetic church. And then it was all ended. So maybe there's life after death. Maybe there's some hope that we can continue to talk about these things.
I think so, very much. Thank you, Mary. And thanks for giving us a bit of a pitch into what Sunday mornings over the summer will look like. I think they'll be broad and varied, and we'll learn a little bit more about which each Sunday is going to be about in our upcoming e-news distributions. But thanks for going ahead and mentioning Raj. He'll be a great addition. Thank you.
Sure.
We have time for a couple of others. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things I've thought about is that, and partly listening to this discussion, is how we are learning more about networking, and how important I think it is for Central not to worry about Central getting credit for things, but Central helping members of Central connect with larger things like Presbyterians for Better Georgia or whatever, that we don't have to think, oh, Central is going to do this, but Central members are going to be involved in all these different things. And I think a lot of churches are beginning to realize that we don't have to be so focused on what can Central do as how can we Central help every person connected with Central get involved in something that's already going on and empower that, so we don't all have to invent the wheel, so to speak.
It's well said, Mary Jane. And I think there are a lot of people who are looking for avenues through which to connect, trusted people to help them get connected with another group to take action around things that matter to them. And Central can be that. It is that, and can continue to be that in this season. Because people learn very quickly to trust each other, because this church is full of people of amazing integrity. They, walk the walk and talk the talk, and it all, works together. And so if our church can continue to be an avenue through which people come and find both a home and an avenue for action, that's going to mean a lot to people, and it already does. So thanks for naming it and for helping us embrace it as a part of who we are and a vision for who we can continue to be. That's very hopeful to me. Others? We have about 2 or 3 more minutes. Anyone else want to jump in who hasn't had an opportunity to weigh in today?
I'll jump in with one other addition in addition to everything we've discussed this hour, which has been very powerful. So thank you for putting this together, Jessica, and thank you to all the guests. I've been very moved by just the creativity with technology and how all of us have learned, sort of stretched. I know I have personally stretched my prayer life in new ways, and I want us to find ways to continue that. Just, the chat feature and sharing prayers publicly was not a tradition I grew up with. Even praying out loud or praying publicly, we were those frozen, chosen Presbyterians growing up, where you prayed, it was a very internal relationship with God that you had. So I'm stretching myself, and I really appreciate, Jessica, your support and the ways in which we can pray with each other, for community, for partners throughout the world, together using this new technology, and just trying to think through with creativity and imagination how we carry that deep sense of the importance of a prayer life. So thank you for helping lead us in those ways, Jessica.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy. I do think there are many ways to cultivate an inward spirituality that can lead to external effect, but I do think however you do it, it's really vital to cultivate that inward sense of self, but also motion out, and a spiritual desire to offer compassion and care and concern for others. And if what's happening in here is cultivated well and in community, not just in isolation, then that what's in flows out, right? There are those really sometimes sort of simple scripture verses that talk about, whatever's in comes out. I mean, it happens, right? If we've had a toxic day in our heads, like toxic thing comes out of our mouths. But if we've had the ability to cultivate a prayerful attitude toward others within and among, then prayerful and concerned and compassionate actions flow out too. And we're not all perfect every day, every moment, but I'm enjoying that part of our life together right now, that we can all grow in that way together. So thanks, Amy. Yeah. Well, we have only 1 more minute, so I feel like the appropriate thing to do after Amy's tee up there is to pray. Does that sound good to everybody? Let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for the gift of this community. Thank you for all the people on this call and the panelists who prepared, and for all those who are lending their spiritual lives, their hearts and hands, their minds, their souls to continue to help be vessels of love for your presence in this world. We thank you for the beacon of light that we have enjoyed together this morning, and we ask that you would amplify and reflect it into the rest of our community this week, that we might continue to be encouraged by what you're doing in our midst. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. I really enjoyed time with you. Really grateful.
Thank you, Jessica.
Great to see all of you.
Absolutely. Have a good morning. See you